YouTube, it is me again, back with another video, and this time we are taking a break from the Flower Girl series because I don't have the ending finished yet, and we are delving back into some more character introductions. Now, I want to first preface that if you haven't seen the universe introduction, a lot of the things that I'm going to be referencing in this video will not make sense, but I also just rewatched my universe introduction and realized there were a couple of talking points that I had that don't make that much sense unless you're in my head and know the story as well as I do. So I'd like to first clarify, under the reign of the Wild King, the kingdom at large was known as Raiden. They were the Raiden Kingdom. After the revolution, Killian Dremane, who became king, renamed the kingdom to the Kingdom at Olden, because Olden is an old magical word that basically means liberty in the magical tongue that grants people the ability to transform into dragons. There is a lot of lore and history into what makes them able to transform into dragons that I haven't delved into and won't delve into here, but if you would like to see a lore video, I will definitely get into that soon. So, that was something I wanted to clarify. I also wanted to clarify that when I refer to Nina and Adela and all of those characters as, like, the people I'm talking about are their parents. I refer to them that way because Nina is the perspective character of the actual narrative storyline, and Adela is one of the major characters in the storyline. That's why I refer to characters like Aldrich and Killian and all of them as the parents of these characters. So, that said, that all explained, let's jump into the OC introduction. So, this is the Crown Princess Adela, and I have introduced Adela, I think, twice before, but I deleted the first video, and the second one is very outdated, and the art in it is terrible, so we just won't even mention that exists, will we? Anyway, so I thought that I would go into a sort of chronological talk about who Adela is and how she develops as a character. So I want to start by addressing Adela before the raids. So the raid of the Olden people by the Raiden people happened around the time that Adela was six or so years old. So by this point, Adela is a very young, bubbly, and just generally adorable child. Adela is a storyteller. She's a very imaginative and bright child from very early on. It's clear to her father and mother from very young that this is a very smart and very caring girl with just a huge imagination and a love for history. One of Adela's favorite stories to tell as a little girl was how her father and the man she sees as her uncle of sorts, Ulrich, how they conquered the Wild King. Mind you, her retelling of it is much more glamorous than the war actually was, but she's a child. She doesn't really understand the intricacies of war, and no one blames her for that. She's very just exuberant and outgoing, and she'll talk to anyone who approaches her. She's the kind of person who walks into a room, and even though she's very little, she just kind of owns it. That never changes as she gets older. The older she gets, the more refined this charisma becomes, but it's always there. Now, when the raid happens, Adela, her father, her mother, and her little brother are all kind of ushered away to a secret hiding spot near the kingdom, but at enough of a distance that it's safe. Now, she has no idea what's happening in the war at first. She's a scared kid who just knows that there's a horrible battle going on, and her friends are gone. Nina and Direft, Nina's older brother, are both gone. Those are two people she relied on, especially Nina, who was her best friend and really close to her age, so her main peer for most of her life. Adela is frightened, but she tries to be optimistic because her parents are trying to reassure her that everything is going to be okay. But they're not really sure. The Raiden people are powerful, but Killian has had his soldiers trained just in case something like this happens. So, when the kingdom at Olden finally does win the day, Adela, Killian, Avinyar, and her mother, Avadaria, all find their way back to the castle. They're reinstated as king and queen, but their joy at winning their home back is short-lived. They find out that while everyone was trying to get away, a great many of their council members were killed in the raid. The caravans that were supposed to be helping people get to safety were attacked by Raiden dragons, and a lot of people died. As far as these characters are aware, as far as the royal family and the kingdom at large is aware, among the casualties are Ulrich, Nina, Dyreft, and Nina's mother. They're all declared dead. Because really, if you look at the scene and if you look at all of the evidence, they're just gone. And with such a brutal attack, and not to be too macabre, but a lot of unidentified people, they had to assume that their friends, their right hands, their family is gone. Adela is devastated. She's just lost her best friend, and her uncle, and her aunt, and her other friend. Everything feels like it's turned on its head, and this bubbly, cheerful girl experiences feelings of grief and loss that she doesn't understand. No one really blames her for changing, but it's hard to deny that Adela isn't as bubbly and effervescent as she was before the raid. Up into her preteen years, Adela grows sort of a resentment for the Raiden people. Their raid, their want for more than they deserve, it killed her best friend and her family. She lost so many people because they thought that they deserved the kingdom. At least, that was how it was told to her. That was how she came to understand it and how she came to cope. Adela threw herself into practicing so that she could be the next monarch. Her father had decided fairly early on, when he had 2 children, that either one of them could assume the throne, but it would be the one who was the most qualified to take on the job who would get the role, the person who would be the best fit for the kingdom. And Adela was determined to be the next queen. She threw herself into her studies. She studied the law as closely as anyone possibly could, to the point that she knew it better than her father did most of the time. It wasn't easy for her to come across all of this information. She had to read some pretty sensitive and horrible things that took the glamour away from her historical retellings of her childhood. She came to understand that war isn't glamorous and exciting. It's horrible and sad and awful. Adela comes across some of the laws, though, that she finds herself disagreeing with. Once she understands the full scope of what happened, she comes to realize that the Raiden people might have had a point. Her father's law outlining that people were no longer able to use their dragon forms, something that they had been blessed with for all of their lives, the one thing that had earned them freedom, for him to take it away, she thought that that was wrong of him. But that confused her. Because if her father was wrong, did that then mean that the people who killed her best friend were right? Adela is and was incredibly confused, but she rationalized it in a pretty smart way. She came to understand that the way the Raiden people went about expressing themselves was wrong, and the severity at which her father punished innocent people was also wrong, but both of them had pretty darn good reasons for feeling the way that they did. Her father had good reason to be suspicious of anyone training their dragon side. After all, the Wild King ascended to power by basically killing his way to the throne. Who's to say that won't happen again? And who's to say the people won't be worse off for it? But at the same time, the Raiden people had always known this dragon form, and it had been what had saved their lives. So, for him to just say, well, nah, you can't use that anymore, they had a pretty good reason to be miffed. Adela went into the cellar, the dungeon, I'm sorry. Couldn't remember that word for a minute. She went into the dungeon, and she spoke to some of the people who had been arrested following the raid. She came to understand that they weren't necessarily bad people, but they weren't good people either. They were willing to do awful things, but that doesn't mean that they were, at their core, awful. Adela decided that she was going to train herself to find a more diplomatic approach. She tried to talk to her father, but he was incredibly angry at her for going against him and for speaking in such a flagrantly disrespectful way, as far as he was concerned. She was questioning his leadership, and he was not okay with that. So, Adela kept her mouth shut, but she never changed her mind. She always felt that there was something she needed to do. There needed to be a change so that people weren't dying anymore, so that people weren't oppressed anymore on either side. This met with a lot of resistance. Her father's new council was largely of the same belief that he was, and without Ulrich to help temper him, Killian lost his way. He was never a bad man, and not even really a bad king, but he allowed himself to be influenced by his anger and his grief far more than he should have for a king. Adela recognized this in her father, but she felt empathy for him. She felt the same grief that he did, and how could she really blame him for taking it so hard when it was such an awful thing to begin with? When the Raiden ambassadors come into the city, Adela doesn't recognize Nina. She doesn't recognize Ulrich. She doesn't recognize any of them. So, for her, what's she gonna do? She's not really sure, actually. She's conflicted. She wants to believe that everyone is at least partially good. She wants to believe that there's a reason everyone does what they do. She ends up growing closer to Nina and Anira, and Direft as well. She starts to find herself drifting back into that familial unit that she had lost all those years ago. She was devastated to lose it, and even though she doesn't recognize Nina, something starts to click. The two of them are both confused and conflicted, recognizing the bad in the people that they've been raised around, and the good in the people that they weren't raised around, and vice versa. They see all of it in shades of gray, and because they both understand that there's more to the world than they've been led to believe, they find themselves drawn together, because really, Adela has no one else to talk to. She has no one else who understands that maybe things aren't what they appear. Adela feels incredibly caged in. She's a woman of the people and explores the city, but she feels withdrawn from it a little, because she worries that if she were to ever tell people that she believes the Raiden civilization deserves a fair shake, she worries that the city would hate her, that no one would understand, that no one would stand beside her, and she would lose everything she's worked so hard for. It's a devastating thought that just by expressing herself to the people she wants to save and wants to rule, they might turn against her. So, Adela keeps herself fairly close to the vest. She's charismatic and charming and wins anyone who walks into a room, but she keeps something of a distance between herself and the world, so that she never has to worry about someone hurting her and it affecting the way that she tries her best to prove she can rule. Adela's main hope is that someday she'll be able to talk to her father and explain to him how she feels and explain to him that while she understands what he's done, she doesn't agree with it. And she hopes that maybe someday he'll listen. So, that's Adela, and I hope that I was really good at explaining things, and I'm sorry I completely blanked on Anira's name for most of this video. That's Nina's mother. I don't know why. I think because in the original dream, Anira was quote-unquote played by my own mother. So I keep wanting to refer to her as my mother, but she's not my mother, and I've edited her appearance quite severely, so she doesn't even look like my mom. So, that's a thing. That's a human mistake that I've made. Anyway, that is all that I have for you guys today. A nice, long OC introduction video, going back to my roots a little bit, and I hope that this wasn't too verbose for you guys. I know I sometimes have a way of getting carried away with things, and I really hope that you guys enjoy my ranting and raving and loving of my own created universes. That said, I will catch you guys in the next video if you're subscribed, which you should be, because I'm awesome. That's a joke. I have fake confidence. Anyway, I hope that you enjoyed, and I hope you have a good morning, evening, afternoon, nighttime, time of day, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.